A bit of background to me. I've been using GraphQL for a long time. I've been following everything that's happening on the spec, and when GraphQL subscriptions were first introduced into the spec, I was very excited about it and been doing all kinds of experiment also with live queries and stuff like this. But today I want to focus on actually getting GraphQL subscription from localhost into production. So first I want to know, anyone here already using GraphQL subscriptions? That's cool, me too. And anyone here planning to use GraphQL subscriptions? Okay, cool, so maybe you can learn something today. So GraphQL subscriptions, they were first introduced in 2017 in an RFC. And then in 2018, we actually got them into the spec. And GraphQL subscriptions, in comparison to GraphQL mutations and GraphQL query operations, they only select one root field, and the result of the execution is not a single result, but an event stream of results. That basically means we can, over time, push new data to our client. That's really cool. And the event stream will run infinitely until the event source will exceed and the server has no data for us anymore, or if the client will close the connection, then the server will hopefully also clean up the source and not result in a memory leak. So all of that is specified in the GraphQL specification. The GraphQL specification is great in defining a type system. It also gives us the schema definition language and the algorithms for running GraphQL, but it actually doesn't give us the tool for sending GraphQL over something. So for that, we need the additional GraphQL transport protocols. The one that's the most popular, that a lot of you are hopefully using, is GraphQL over HTTP. But then we also have GraphQL over WebSocket, GraphQL over SSC, and at least some here are probably also using their own custom protocol, because GraphQL over HTTP does only allow us to send query and mutation operations. It does not define executing subscription operations. So the cool thing is that HTTP is pretty simple, right? We just have our URL, we give some headers and a body, and we get our response. So we send one request to our server, the server processes the request, and then it sends us a response. Pretty simple. By the way, the GraphQL over HTTP specification is still a working draft, so everyone here using GraphQL over HTTP is using something experimental. So how are we doing live data now with GraphQL? Well, we have additional specs. For example, GraphQL over WebSocket. GraphQL over WebSocket is not only for subscriptions, it can also execute query operations and mutation operations, but, well, I'm not going to update my software. But most of the time, it's used in addition to GraphQL over HTTP to only do like the subscription operations over WebSocket, while we still do all our other operations over HTTP, hopefully. And how does it even differ like from just doing something over HTTP? Well, first of all, we can send multiple operations via a single WebSocket connection. There needs to be a specific protocol between the client and the server. And in comparison to HTTP, we also get like a duplex connection. So instead of having to, for every GraphQL request, open a new HTTP connection, we can establish this persistent connection between our client and server once, and then with less latency execute a lot of operations there. And furthermore, if we use WebSockets, we use an additional protocol on top of WebSockets, so we need more logic and SDKs for our client and our server to actually encode and communicate with each other. Yeah, and last of all, it allows us to use GraphQL subscriptions. So another protocol that also allows us to use subscriptions is the GraphQL over SSC protocol. It also allows us to execute query operations and mutation operations, but I've never seen anyone do it. Like, please don't do it. So you should use it for subscription. The cool thing here in comparison to WebSockets is that you actually just send a HTTP request to our server. Yeah, WebSocket is also to some extent HTTP. There's like a handshake and something like this, but SSEs, we only send a HTTP request and we only get one HTTP response. The difference here is that the HTTP response is not immediately closed. We get an event stream that will push more data over time. So here's an example. We can just use curl, for example, to call an GraphQL over SSE endpoint, and we can see the output with our terminal. I tried to also do an example for WebSocket, but I did not know how I could fit it onto one slide. But that's one point for SSE here. So with GraphQL over SSE, we still have one request that's going from the client to the server. But the thing is, in HTTP, the client cannot send any more data to the server as the request has been processed. So we need for every request or for every subscription that we need to set up, we would need to send another HTTP request to our server. But if we're using HTTP 2.0 or higher, that should, in most cases, hopefully not be a problem. So then the server will tell the client that we're having an event stream, and as there is subscription event data on the server available, it will then stream new parts to the client that it can then use for the application or whatever we're using. So GraphQL SSE is, compared to WebSocket, we only send like a simple HTTP request, one subscription equals one HTTP connection. And one thing that I think is really cool is that we can reuse anything that's already HTTP on our server. So if we do authentication based on cookies, we get it out of the box if we're using SSE. We don't need to change a lot. So which protocol is the right one for me? I mean, it depends on your use case. So one of the benefits of SSE is the simple HTTP, reusing the authentication, less trouble with firewalls. WebSockets are still blocked by enterprise firewalls. GraphQL over WebSockets is a duplex connection, and if latency is a big issue for us, we should probably go with WebSockets over SSE. So we should always decide based on the use case, and I want to give like one example that I was working on recently. So I'm working on GraphQL Hive, and there we have like a single sign-on. So company admins can connect their SSO provider to the applications, and then users in the organization can sign on with that. There's one problem. People fuck things up and always configure it in the wrong way. And then they need to come to us, and we need to look at our logs and then tell them, hey, this is wrong. Maybe your service is responding with 500 or whatever. So we thought it would be a cool idea if we can stream these logs to the admins so they can look at them themselves and we don't have to deal with it anymore. So basically, this is what we had in mind. So within the admin dashboard of GraphQL Hive, you can open like a model and it will start streaming all the logs regarded to open to the SSO provider. So then if someone attempts to log in, we will list all the requests that are being made from our end to their endpoint, and then they can debug themselves, and we don't need to debug it. So for this, we decided to go with GraphQL over SSE, first of all, because WebSockets are more prone to being blocked by firewalls. Then also, we were already using HTTP cookie-based authentication. We could also reuse this without having to do anything big on the client. And then also, it's a bit of a shameless self-plug, we maintain GraphQL Yoga, we've been using it. It supports SSE out of the box, so it was easier to use it. And then also another cool thing is that we could use persistent documents out of the box. So, yeah. So in the end, our request for powering this feature was just a simple request to /GraphQL with a document ID and some variables, and yeah, that's it. If you're interested about persistent operations, I'm also talking about this tomorrow in our workshop. But let's go back to the subscriptions. There's more than just a protocol, right? We just code a protocol. But in order to have a protocol or make use of the protocol, first need some data. So how does a subscription actually give us some data? Well, GraphQL things are usually easy for the front-end developers. They get like, yeah, you just write your subscription operation and you get your data. But it moves. But for our back-end developers, they still have the same complexity. They still need to deal with everything else. So in most cases, or for most use cases, I would say having a PubSub system as the subscription event source is a good choice. So subscribers subscribe to one topic. In that case, it would be a GraphQL subscription. And then a publisher, which is some other business logic, would push to this topic. And based on that, we get our event that we then stream to our user. Nice. There's one problem. Maybe in the beginning we start like with a single server, and then just having everything in memory might work. But as we get more traffic and our product becomes successful, we have multiple server instances that need to handle our load. Then just having a single PubSub system within our memory is not enough anymore. Then we need something external like Redis or a cloud provider. In our example, we were already using Redis for caching, so just also abusing that for PubSub was easy choice. But there's also other challenges that I dived in a bit, but yeah, let's see. So browser tabs. Each browser tab has their own HTTP connections and WebSocket connections. So if you're a Power Tab user like me, the API won't like that. So there is some ways we can deduplicate the requests. And one of them is like using a web worker. So we can instruct all our browser tabs to communicate with a shared web worker that is pooling the requests and the event streams being sent to our API server. I was experimenting with this a bit as I implemented this feature, but in the end I realized it's not that necessary in the state right now because the feature is like very specific. But as we explore adding more subscription features to our app and other parts of our app, we will reconsider doing this. And then also our GraphQL service will restart. So over time we will deploy new schema changes, we will ship bugs, and our server might die or it might restart, and our clients will start to reconnect. And there can be issue here because if we disconnect all our clients and all our clients will then at the same time try to reconnect, it could end in DDoSing our server. So one cool thing here is that both reference implementations for GraphQL over WebSocket and GraphQL over C already have randomized exponential backoff implemented, so that makes it less likely to happen. And last, I was also asking myself, when shouldn't I use GraphQL subscription? Because it's cool, like having live features in your app is nice, but it's not always necessary. It comes with a lot of complexity, a lot of infrastructure and additional databases, PubSub, stores, and whatever you need to support. So I was looking at this page. So here we have like a see new post button, and the first thing that comes to my mind, oh, let's write a GraphQL subscription on new post. We get something. But at the scale that Twitter, for example, might operate, might be not a good idea. And I wanted to just say, polling is sometimes okay. So in this scenario, the data does not need to be super real time. Like, it's okay if it's 1 minute or 30 seconds late. If we eventually know that a new post is there, it's good enough. Like, we don't need this like 1 millisecond feedback. And this could be a query for polling this, but even if we're smarter, we could even implement this into our fetch more posts operation that is executed when we doom scroll our Twitter feed. And then we get this information anyways. So my conclusion, keep things simple. I prefer using SSE over WebSocket, but decide based on your use case. Try to reuse your existing tech stack whenever possible to avoid adding additional complexity or technology that you haven't used before. PubSub as an event stream source is in most cases the good choice, unless like losing events is like critical or not good for your business. And then also use persistent operations with e-text headers and polling as an alternative to GraphQL subscription if it's possible. Thank you.